Hey guys, welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. Today we're going to talk about boards and businesses and boards.
So exciting. Really is.
With our friend here from New Zealand.
Kiwi accent all the way.
And his name is Carl Bates. What do you do again? Carl Bates is not only the founder and CEO, right, of Serdar Group, but he's also an international best-selling author of his book Traversing the Avalanche, which somehow arrived in my possession. So I'm going to set this one up. So and then this is actually going to be a great episode, guys, if you are a business owner, especially, and you're curious about the role of boards and small to medium enterprise.
And if you're not curious, you should be, because you've become a director, you've signed a form, and if you're not curious, it's probably because you think through some form of divine intervention, you now know what it means to be a director. It's like the one thing we all become in our businesses, but we have no idea about.
Exactly. So Traversing the Avalanche, the book, when my book came out, have you read my book yet?
I haven't.
Have I given you a copy?
No, you haven't.
Here you go.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
I'll sign it for you later.
Awesome.
But anyway, so you'll see that it's printed beautifully.
It is.
But so I basically published it through Amazon Print on Demand. So I ordered my own book just to see the print quality. And when it arrived at home, your book somehow arrived in my package. I have literally to this day have no idea. And I was like, what is this shit called Traversing the Avalanche? I didn't order this. This is ridiculous promotion. And anyway, so I forgot about it, and then I had dinner with Rich Mulholland, who's obviously a mutual friend of ours.
Yep.
And he was like, I was talking about boards and scale and exit, stuff like this. He's like, yeah, well, you should talk to Carl Bates. So I went to your website, and then I saw the book was Traversing the Avalanche. So it was actually your book, and yet here we are today. So you're busy setting up a board for me, which is great. And
very awesome.
We're going to get into the meat and the potatoes around that. But let's go back to the beginning. How did you get into this space? Because it's quite exciting, and it's certainly a space that I don't know anybody else playing in. So walk us through that.
Well, in the beginning, I was born. Sorry, I get this sort of feeling that that's the sort of show we're going to have today, so that's cool. No, but on a serious note, I was actually very young. I grew up in a family of businesses. My parents were in business, my grandparents were in business, and I was lucky enough when I was born to have 7 of my 8 great-grandparents alive. And they were all in businesses. And so as I was growing up, I was seeing them all, work in their businesses, work hard, grow things. And it just felt like they were missing something. And that they hadn't really created the value that I thought they probably should have. And so as I went off to university, I was really lucky. I got the opportunity to go to university at the young age of 16 to study accountancy. And while I was at university, I got appointed as an independent director of a private hospital in New Zealand. And then the next year, I got appointed as an independent director of the largest multi-stadia complex in the Southern Hemisphere.
At 16 years old.
So I was 18, 19 by this point.
Oh, you were 18?
Yeah,
okay.
Just a little, yeah. And then I was, when I was...
Hashtag overachiever.
That was 18, 19. And then, when I was 20, I got appointed as a director of one of the largest... technical universities in New Zealand, or what they call a polytechnic. And I got this understanding of this thing called directors and the role of a board in a successful organization. And I looked back at our family businesses and I went, why do we not have those? And then I got to understand this idea that people think that they're a small business, so they get to run their business by small business rules, which basically is slang for I'm allowed to run my business my way. As opposed to doing the things that successful businesses do, which have a board, they have directors, they have these people who challenge them about the journey they're going on. And that really kicked off my journey, which obviously ended up with me being here, and I never expected that back then, to support private companies and family businesses particularly to understand the value of a board in their journey of growth, their journey of value development, their journey of taking their business to the next level, and to implement them. And so that's now what we do.
So I suppose the next obvious question is, well, what is the value of a board? Why, because I think that, as you touched on, the perception is that until I have 500 staff or 100 staff, or I'm bigger than I am currently. I mean, we've got 30 odd staff here.
Yep.
And you wouldn't say, based on perception. I don't know where the perception is driven from. Maybe it's probably just a lack of education. But the perception is that a board is for big companies and you must be listed to have a board.
Yep.
When in fact the opposite is true.
And I think it comes from a number of things. First of all, I think it comes from a complete misunderstanding of what it means to be in business. We say, it's my business. I own my company. Well, you don't. You're a shareholder in this thing called Kung Fu Digital, right?
Digital Kung Fu. It's fine. We get it all the time.
We'll see. I'm just Kung Fuing
Could be
it
a
around.
spin-off. Could be like the sister company. Just confuse the hell out of people.
Well, hey, double the chance of getting the business, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
But no, proper faux pas on my part. The point is that you think it's your business, but actually you're a shareholder in this business called Digital Kung Fu. And through being a shareholder, you have the right to a few things. You have the right to receive a dividend. You have the right to appoint the directors. You have the right to liquidate it if it's not performing, but you don't own it. It's not a share owner. It's a shareholder, a holder of a bundle of rights. And it really starts at that initial phase. We set up our thing called a company and we think that all of a sudden we know what it means to be a director, but we don't. And so from that point, everything about the way we run our businesses is confused because we think it's all about this thing called being a small business owner and blah, blah, blah. And then we see these big businesses with directors and we go, yeah, but that's for when you get there. And I suppose I like to use the metaphor of climbing a mountain, which is really where the word Serdar comes from. Serdar is the lead Sherpa in a mountaineering expedition, the other person who sees the right route, they know who to choose for the team, and they guide you in the process of getting you to the summit. They've been there before. And if you think about it, when you climb a mountain, you don't wear what we would call in New Zealand your jandals, or what you call your pluckies or flip-flops. You don't wear your pluckies up the mountain, and then when you get to the summit, go, oh, I'm at the summit now, let's put on our climbing boots. You put your climbing boots on the moment you decide to climb. And in business, it's no different. If you want to be a big business, do you get directors when you get there, or do you get them as part of the journey to get you there? And we essentially advocate the latter. Having people who are sitting around the business, who are independent, they're not shareholders, they don't get a management salary in the business. Their role is entirely being involved or supporting and challenging you about the way you're running the business for the business's sake. Their contribution, their focus, their value is all about saying, what is in the best interest of the company? The sustainability, the growth, the value creation of the company. And by doing that, they ultimately create value for you as the shareholder.
And one of the interesting, just to go back to where you started, was when you register an entity, you think you own it, but you don't. Hence, like the difference between shareholder and so forth. That was one of the things on that training that I did around. I don't know who ran that again. Who facilitated
Roger Hitchcock, my business partner.
Yeah, so he's a very knowledgeable chap, and
awesome
we debated at length about the structure of boards, the relationship to the founder, the relevance of the word founder. Because it's very much a historical view. You founded the company, but congratulations. That doesn't mean shit when you look forward. It's like, I'm the founder and CEO. Yeah, okay, fine. But actually in the context of a board, you're a director, there's a shareholder. And what else is there? Is
so there are directors, shareholders, and managers.
Managers, yeah. And then the relationship between all of these people, the board, and then the role of the law in all of this, and how the law actually sees business. And it's completely, and maybe maybe it sits with MBAs, but maybe it doesn't. I'm not really sure. But why is there such a misunderstanding? Let's take the Matt Brown, founder of Digital Kung Fu, whatever. Why is there such a misunderstanding about the relationships between all of these different roles, and then more broadly the context in terms of the law and legal entities and things like that? Why is that all so grey and misunderstood? So
I think your initial comment about like the misunderstanding is there completely, and everyone has this view that's not based on any reality. And we talk about university and MBAs, and I'm a chartered accountant. No one in my chartered accounting process, whether it be the professional exams or at university, sat me down and said, Carl, as a shareholder, these are the questions that you need to ask. When we talk about company law, people say to you as a director, here's what you're liable for. But no one actually sits you down and says, as a director, this is actually your role in a practical sense, early in the journey, further on, we start attending a course, or we might go to a session where we get taught about the company law and what our liability is as a director. But no one right at the beginning says, Matt, you're about to open a business. You're about to found this thing called Digital Kung Fu. You're going to be a shareholder. And as a shareholder, it means this. As a director, it means this. And because you're going to be the first employee manager, it means this. Do you understand? Sign here. And if you do, we'll give you your license to operate. What happens is you can sign up, pay your 100 rand or whatever the number is these days. And all of a sudden, you're a shareholder or director and the first employee of a business you start. And from that moment forward, you confuse which hat you're wearing in every conversation you have to do with the business. And at any stage, you don't like anything anyone is saying to you about the way the business has been run. You pull out the, well, I founded it card as like this trump card that you get to play in any situation, which has no legal relevance.
That's it. So there you go. See, because you think you're attached to the idea, well, I founded it. So and I own it, but you don't. And that's the two things are fundamentally incorrect. And that's the one thing that Rich was telling me over dinner. He was like, Matt, you can't be an employee, a shareholder, and a director all at the same time. They need to be fulfilled by different people. And he says, when you as you say, when you register a company, you automatically fulfill those three roles.
Yep.
But on a modus operandi basis, you feel like you're just the CEO, but the law doesn't see it that way.
Correct. And I think part of that, so just to clarify the statement, I'm not saying to anyone listening that you can't be the shareholder, a director, and an employee of your company. What I'm saying is you can't be the only person wearing all three hats, i.e. you can't be the only shareholder who's the only director and who is an employee of the business. You have to have, sitting around the director table, people who only wear the director hat. I actually call it the law of three hats. And the law of three hats says, in order for a business to be sustainable, to create what we would call extreme business success, the book is actually called The Laws of Extreme Business Success. It says the only way to create extreme business success is to separate the hats of shareholder, director, and manager. And the only way to do that is to have people who are sitting around the director table, the board table, who only wear the hat of a director. And what that does is it forces management issues to the management level and shareholder issues to the shareholder level.
Okay. So walk us through the value of a board. Like, where does one start, and how do we start to, as you say, separate the three roles and start to implement the structures necessary for either exit or for scale or for, as you correctly point out, extreme business success?
So it starts right back at the beginning of what is the game you're trying to play. And I like to put the games into two camps. There's the game of craftsmanship housed within a thing called a company, or there's the game of entrepreneurship. Now, craftsmanship has everything to do with you. It's all about maximizing your hourly rate, banking as much money as you can, and ensuring the day you retire, you have enough money to retire on, because your craft is not worth anything. It's what you're physically doing, and in order to do it, you have to be there. And I think a lot of us play the game of craftsmanship, but we call it business. But it's actually just craftsmanship. We're either a really good accountant and people want to use us, or we're a really good lawyer, and unless you're there, they're not interested in paying your firm. Or you're a plumber and they want you on site. Craftsmanship. Entrepreneurship has got nothing to do with you. Entrepreneurship is all about the promise that the enterprise or the company is making. And the company has, as we've talked about already, shareholder, directors, and managers. And you've got to build a company to be sustainable without you. If that is the game you're looking to play, a board of directors is part of the process. You can't deny the fact that a company requires a board of directors, plural, in order to be successful. And I suppose if I can put it plainly, the idiot test to that theory is, have you ever heard of a board of director?
No.
We inherently know this, right? We inherently know that in order for a company to be successful, there must be a board of directors. So understanding that, it's then about going, okay, So if we get that and we want to go on the journey of finding the independent directors or the non-executive independent directors who sit on the board of the business, who are there to be the custodians of that promise, that journey that the company is going on, we've got to understand, where is this business going? Is there a real business model, an opportunity here? If there is, what type of people should be sitting around the board based on who's already there, who's in management, where are the gaps? And then we go out looking for those people. Now, I'm sure, again, you immediately go, yeah, but I can't afford it, right? That's the big question. I can't afford what they pay a director to be the director of a listed company to be a director of my business. And it's like, well, just think that theory through. If I said to you, you need a finance manager, would you immediately assume that I'm suggesting that you pay someone what they pay the CFO of Bidvest to be a finance manager of your business? No, you wouldn't. It's the same with directors. There are different levels of directors paid at different levels dependent on the size of the business that they're being a director of and their skill and ability. There are some people who aren't going to come in and happily be a director of your business for a small number, and there are others who have the skill and ability to support you on that growth journey who would be willing to accept a fee commensurate to the size and journey that your business is going on. So it's about finding those people.
So use digital kung fu as context here.
Yeah.
So I think that would really help, because a lot of the time I think, when you're talking about structural implementations like this, it's quite theoretical until you give it context and you go, that makes sense. Awesome. So let's give that context, if you don't mind.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, cool. So as an example, a couple of weeks ago, I had lunch with a client from a massive, largest privately owned IT company in Africa, and the conversation kind of went, well, we're paying you too much money, and we know we need to kind of own a piece of you. And I was like, well, that's great, but not for sale, and not for sale today. But certainly in a year from now, I would like to be on the market, and if the value, because obviously you need a willing buyer and a willing seller, and I'd like to talk to you about, valuation models and things like that. Because seemingly there's different ways, and there's not really any consensus other than willing buyer, willing seller. Actually, at the end of the day, because you're going to say I'm worth 10, I'm going to say no, I'm worth 20, and then we're going to get to 15, and then that's where we do the deal. So everything else is kind of, well, we did your due diligence, congratulations, and the accountants would love that shit, But the context here is, we're actually not ready for sale. And one of the reasons is, well, we don't have a board. And, we're a young company. We're like 18 months old, and the market's going, holy shit, you guys are clearly an outlier or an anomaly, despite how crap the market is and all the sub stories that are out there around why it's a really bad idea to start a business in a fucked up economy like the one that we have. But for me, it's actually the best time, because if you can succeed and shoot the lights out like we are, then you've got a great business. But that doesn't mean that you're ready to sell or exit. So that's really why we're looking to set up a board, because it's a fundamental question that any acquirer will ask you, which is, Matt Brown, if you get hit by a bus, how much revenue are you going to lose? And can the business run without you? And if you can solve that problem, which, by the way, is a very hard thing to do, just build a business is one thing, but get it to run without you is an entirely different animal. And so a board is mission critical for me as the CEO and founder and employee and and manager and director and so forth.
And primary ego.
And primary ego. I know there can only be one alpha. Only one. But only one sensei. I don't need, no one else wears sensei shirts around here. But on a serious note, it's a completely unknown for me. And I actually had to say to this chap, well, we're in the process of. So even if you wanted to, dude, it's a question of, well, we would probably lose. I don't know. How much revenue would we lose if I got hit by a bus? Half? Probably half. So that's not acceptable for an acquirer.
No.
It's also not acceptable for me, because I've got a green card for the States. So basically we've got two scenarios. One, I sell the whole thing in a year, and kumbaya, and we give dividends to all the staff and the shareholders, etc. And
well, you don't give, the company gives.
The company would. Sorry, thank you so much for the corrective. See, this is why you're here, Carl Bates. And then the other option is, well, we don't do a deal. It still has to run without me. And I'm not going to the UK where it's, well, I can just pick up a phone and go, hey, Q-Dog, where's my podcast?
Yep.
Like I have to do that at like 3 a.m.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? So it's not practical. So the role of the board in both those scenarios is to provide assurance on the continuity and sustainability of my business.
Yep.
But I have no idea where to start. So we just had a meeting actually before we started this podcast. So I'd like you to, I think it would really help, walk us through your 3-step process. So where do we start? You said there were 5 things that happened in phase 1. What are those 5 things?
So I'll answer the question. I just want to go back a little bit because I think it's worth going back to a couple of things you said. Different businesses and different shareholders and teams will have a different reason for looking to have a board. So we work, for example, with a lot of family businesses where the board's value is the continuity of the succession planning, the long-term sustainability of the family business. And all of the research globally shows that family businesses with a board have longer sustainability or more, have a certainty of sustainability that others don't and a higher profitability. Businesses looking to be acquired, like the conversation that you're having around your business, show that the multiple is higher at point of sale, particularly a reference point for it is IPOs. IPOs where the board was in place prior to the mandatory point it had to be in place in order to have an IPO, got a higher multiple than those that just put the board in place at the mandatory point prior to IPO. So all the research shows that having an effective board in place drives business performance. It's not fail-safe. There are clearly examples around the world of businesses that have a board that fail. But there are millions of examples of businesses that don't have a board, like all of my great-grandparents, who don't become more than a craft because they don't have that support, that drive, that challenge that a board brings. So the reason for putting a board in place can be different, and it is dependent in the particular or on each scenario why you want a board and what you're trying to drive in terms of value. I think the second thing that you touched on that I think is really important is someone looking to buy your business is essentially looking, most of the time, for the same things you would be looking for if you continue to hold on to the business and not be involved operationally. So what I call the law of shareholder wealth creation is about treating your business like an investment, like any other investor would. And until you treat your business as an investment like any other investor would, you lose the game. You can't achieve extreme business success. So just think about that practically. If I'm an investor in this business and I'm not Matt, I'm the investor and you are the chief executive. If this business isn't going to work with Matt as the chief executive, without Matt as the chief executive, my investment is got a major risk. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying to my chief executive, Matt, you need to find a way of making this business sustainable with someone other than you as the chief executive. Otherwise, my investment's at risk. So all we're doing in a lot of these scenarios is actually just creating that separation of hats that we were talking about before and getting a business to think about, well, what do we need to do in order to go on that journey? So in your case here at Digital Kung Fu, the first step that we spoke about is what we call a board readiness assessment. Are you actually ready for a board? Are you going to get value from a board? And if so, what type of board? So there's a whole lot of different board sort of models, monthly meetings, bi-monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, which we don't support, by the way, just as a free throwaway. The more regular board meetings are correlated with business performance, the less regular aren't. So particularly South Africa have a love for quarterly board meetings. We don't support them. They're not supported by the evidence. We would contend that 6 board meetings or 12 board meetings a year, depending on the model we choose for a particular company, drive business performance compared to, for example, quarterly board meetings. So first of all is, are you going to get value? Part of that is, why do you want a board? Second part of that assessment process is, what sort of board? Third part of that is, who should then be sitting around the board? Like, is there a lack of financial knowledge? Is there a need to have someone who understands the buyer's mindset for who you're going to ultimately want to sell this to? And so therefore, do we need someone sitting around the board who's been through the process of selling a business, not necessarily from this industry or of this type, but been through that journey? Do we need someone that understands people? Because actually the business is void of people at a director's level who have an understanding of people development, and that might be part of what's driving you being the sort of go-to person in the business or whatever. So who is it that we need sitting around the board? The next part is, in going to look for those people, they're going to want their due diligence on the business. So the assessment becomes their due diligence. And lastly, what's the roadmap for the board? If we're climbing a mountain, we need a map to the summit. And it's no different for a board. What is the board going to focus on in the next 12 or 18 months that's going to drive the business forward? Because you're not going to do everything. You're not going to be a perfect board in 12 months. It's not like you can pick up a list of things, tick them all, and then go, we've now got a board, great, next. It's a ongoing process and a journey. So really, step one, or what we call phase one, is that assessment of where are you at, what are you doing, what type of people do we need around this table?
Cool. Can I pick up on a couple of things there? So,
what if I said no?
No. Well, then we can just stop. Right, that's it. I'm out. I got another podcast tomorrow, bro. Our business is ridiculously in flux. It's frightening. So I actually we've got the way we basically, manage our customers is that we've got 3 tiers. We've got tier 1, those we're married to.
Yep.
With the revenue targets on them. Then tier 2, those we want to get married to, but we're not married yet. We build them at least once, a minimum of once. And then we've got tier 3, which is our bottom of the pipeline or the pyramid, so to speak.
Yep.
And so for our tier 1 customers, I meet with them at least once a month, so either with the CEO or the CMO or the person that basically pays us all the cash.
Yep.
And I do that for one reason, is because our business changes very, very quickly. So if you worked with us in week 1 of February, by week 4, our business is almost radically different because we were innovating internally. Yep. We don't know what we don't know, and we're building our business to solve a single problem for the technology sector. And so going back to the role of the board in that space, I would, just basing on what you've said, is I would want to meet at least once a month. Once every 2 months would be too slow because our business is it's like, Alexis will attest, it's frightening because people can't actually deal with the change, a lot of them. And so we have to do a lot of people management and like reassurance that this is normal, when you're trying to build a business, especially a startup like ours, which is growing.
Yep.
And again, even the role of a board, we've got new senior people coming in now. And so the entire environment is just radically in flux all the time. So why is this South African, sort of, I don't know, what is it, appetite for quarterly boards? Is it because, let me rephrase the question. What would the implications be of a board that meets monthly versus quarterly?
So I think a board that meets quarterly often is a larger board, meet less regularly and have lots of committees. Tends to be sort of the South African corporate way compared to similar businesses, for example, in Australia or New Zealand, where they are smaller boards, sometimes less committees, but certainly meeting more regularly for a shorter amount of time. I think a lot of private equity guys and girls run quarterly board meetings as a way of managing their time involvement in different boards. But to your point, that regular engagement, so a 4-hour meeting each month that drives engagement with the business, understanding, support for the chief executive, support for the operations team. But obviously at a board level, it's not about the board becoming operational. It's one of those words that gets thrown around. Essentially, people say, oh no, but we're getting too operational in 2 scenarios. One, when management don't like the pressure they're getting from the board, or when people on the board feel like they're doing too much work. The throwaway line is, oh no, we're getting too operational. Now, look, sometimes boards do get too operational or need to get their necks out of what management should be doing. But I think often it's just thrown around as a way of arguing a point. I chair the board of a private company, a startup called the People's Fund here in South Africa. Awesome business in the black procurement financing space. And we meet monthly for 4 hours as a board. And you can see the value and the cadence that's been driven through the rhythm that particular business is getting from that regular engagement from their non-executive directors.
Okay, so I think this is a great sort of point of departure into step 2, which is who should be on the actual board. And I know you touched on that in the beginning, but I want us to talk about, let's just say Alexis. So Alexis is sitting behind you there, the great and powerful Alexis.
Are we allowed to talk about her with her in the room?
She is. She's listening to us, I think. She's hiding here. That's why she doesn't want to be disturbed. She's under the pump. But
she's going to be with the new board, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So as an example, right? So Alexis is like critical to me. Like she takes a lot of the heat off me. And you know, when that board is in place, and from my understanding, the process can take like between 8 and 12 weeks, 12 weeks usually. But now you've got a certain set of minds on that board, and then I've got Alexis in that meeting, right? So she's the operational head here. And as you say, you don't necessarily want there to be overlap in terms of roles and responsibilities. How do you control that? Because you understand, like, because a board, it's like, how do you stop a board making an operational focused decision? And, you know what I'm saying, like, it can be quite, it's not black and white. It's very rare to be black and white. Some cases, yes, but in the large majority, it's actually, it's a discussion. How do you control that?
So there's a couple of ways. First of all, one of the things that most private companies like this don't have, and I haven't actually asked you this question, so this will be an interesting on-air test of this question. Do you have a delegation of authorities?
Do you have a delegation of authorities?
No, by the looks of
trying to think. Well, everybody knows what they should be doing. Is it a formal documented thing? What do you mean?
Okay, so let's make it specific. At what value does someone have to ask you to sign the check before they can, in other words, at what value of something do you have to be involved by definition in making a decision?
Alexis? By definition, I wouldn't say there is a definition. There isn't a definition.
So there isn't a definition. So here's the problem, right? So part of what we're trying to do in terms of growing and scaling up is trying to make things easier and create clarity. But one of the things that a lot of private companies and family businesses do is they don't get clear on, well, actually, this is a decision the chief executive has to make, i.e. Matt, or this is a decision Alexis has to make because she's head of operations, or this is something that the receptionist can make because that's in her delegation, right? A little bit like, when you go into a hotel and there's just a problem that really the person dealing with you at the front desk should be able to make the decision on, but they can't because they have to talk to a manager. 9 times out of 10, that's because someone hasn't actually just said to them, you're allowed to make this decision. And it's the same in the context of a delegation authority. What decisions are people in your business allowed to make without talking to you? By getting clear on that, you actually create a whole lot of time for everyone, right? Okay, I'm going to say I won that round of the game show.
Just hang on. You have to can you hook up? Is there a mic? Can you come talk?
It sounds like we have a new contestant.
We're gonna have this is phone a friend. What's that? Yeah, I'm phoning a friend. It's called Alexis. Go on then.
So I was gonna say it's not for lack of trying.
Excuse me. We have a live audience.
The more we.
Can you mind?
The more you kind of try to get people to make decisions, perhaps because it is ill-defined, that we can't get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so basically my whole mandate is don't come to me with asking for permission to make decisions. Rather make a decision, make a mistake, and then say, Matt, this was the mistake we made. What do you want to do about this? That's probably as far as it goes, really.
I get that, but then someone goes and makes a R1 million mistake, and I guarantee the first thing out of your mouth is, how did you make that decision without coming to me?
So that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about, Alexis. You and your creditors thing for Sage. I don't know what's in that pack of fucking receipts or whatever.
So the point is, it's really about just sitting down and going, what is the authority different people in the business have? So that's one way of solving that problem. The second way is, it's part of the role of the chairman of the board. Often people think the chairman of the board has power by virtue of being the chairman of the board. And that's not true. And the only chairman the only power the chairman of the board has is power specifically delegated to him or her by the rest of the board. The role of the chairman of the board is to facilitate the discussion. And so, look, a chairman's not always going to get it right. I don't always get it right. Sometimes, I do get involved in, I prefer the color red than the color blue on that wall. You get attached to the businesses that you're involved with in some form or another. But I'd like to think 9 times out of 10, I get it right, where I'm saying, hey guys, at a board level, let's just throw this ball back to management. They've heard our views. Now they need to make a call. Or other times saying, hey Matt, as an example, this is something you should have spoken to the board about. You should have got their opinion, and they're right to have you on and say, look, as the chief executive of this business, isn't a call that you get to make. And the moment, just understand this, when you have independent directors, the moment you throw into the conversation, but it's my business, so I'll make the decision anyway, is the moment you lose good independent directors. Because if I'm sitting in the room as an example, and you said to me, well, I'm going to make the decision anyway, why am I sitting here? I don't need to help someone who essentially is saying they're going to like my opinion until they don't like it.
That's I can see why that can be a difficult thing to manage, especially when. So let me go back a step. So my mentor is a billionaire, and he all he does all day is buy companies.
Yep.
And he basically said to me when I first told him about the green card, he was like, "No, you must sell it, the whole thing." And I was like, "Joking? I'm not going to sell the whole thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a board in. I'm going to do these things, and it's going to run without me." And then I was like, "Cool. So who am I going to hire as the basically throat to choke when I'm not around?"
Yeah.
And I was like, shit, that, and then I thought about it, and I kind of had a chat to a few people, and then suddenly I realized how emotionally attached I was to the role itself, because as well as I do that a founder views his business as his own child.
Yep.
And so it becomes less a business decision and more of an emotional one.
Correct.
And so there's a lot of emotion attached to that. So over the last sort of 6 to 9 months, I've worked through my own stuff about, why do I need to control this?
Yep.
And that's a very important thing. And that's probably a thing you should probably look at considering. I don't know what the exact process is. We haven't quite got there yet, but how emotionally attached is the CEO to this business? And can he actually deal with, as you said, 3 independent directors and going, listen here, pal, you're not selling to this company.
Yep. And
to be able to listen to that and then internalize it and not react to it and rather make the appropriate decision. Because ultimately, the board for me is an insurance policy on the sustainability of the business.
Yep.
And I talk about this idea of triangulation. So, if you have 3 people that you trust, and you're thinking something. So should I sell the whole thing, or should I do a minority share, and whatever the hypothesis is? You speak to these 3 people and you go, listen, Carl, I'm thinking this. Bongani, I'm thinking this. Alexis, I'm thinking this. Or whoever's on your board, it could be mentors, whatever. But invariably there, you'll find that the feedback starts to sound the same. And you're looking for that. You're looking for, because you might even find, I'm sure, I don't know what you know, but you might find that the board itself is split, where 2 people are thinking, well, sell the whole thing, but the other one's like, no, dude, I think you're missing an opportunity here, because if you did this, then that, and whatever. So, and I think that for me is the value of the board. It's insurance, because they looking at your blind spots. Yep. Because the thing is, it's like when you're in your business, you're not working on it. And as I said to you earlier before we started, we got like a whole offsite session planned for Friday to discuss this kind of thing.
Yep.
Because you don't see it. You're just in it. You're trying to poke the thing with a stick and hope that its balls grow. You know what I mean? But that's the role of the board. And so, as I say, I think it's not. You might not be ready, but that's an internal thing that you need to wrestle with.
I would say though, often we find that the readiness comes out through the journey, and part of having the board for some of our clients is the challenge to understand what that difference really means. And, I sit around the board of one of our clients who's grown significantly through the process. And we had this discussion, this heated debate in the board room about a particular issue that he was fairly adamant on, and basically said to the independent directors, well, regardless of what you think, I'm going to do it. And so in the board meeting, and he'll tell you the story if you wanted him to, I literally said to him, so what decisions are we allowed to make? And it was one of those moments that could have gone either way. Like the room went silent. The two managers, the CFO and the COO, you could just see went silent, and they're like, this is either going to blow up and this board process is stuffed, or this is going to be a defining moment in the way this board works. And the chief executive sort of stopped for a minute, and then he turned to me. I was chairing the board, or am chairing the board, and said, you're right. What's the board's opinion on this? And that really defined the future process of that board. Now, it required on the part of, and I sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but it's the story, right? It required on the part of the board not just an understanding of company law, not an understanding of what is operational and what's not an understanding of when a director should or shouldn't be involved. What it required was emotional intelligence around the journey that the entrepreneur is going on. And I think one of the magic sources in what we do at the Sadar Group is we understand that emotional journey. Because the problem with governance, for example, here in South Africa, is not King 3, King 4, or when King 5 comes out. The problem with this idea of governance is what I call a marketing one. It's that we try and sell governance to someone like Matt by going, you need to understand King 4. Like, come. That's not going to help in any way, shape, or form. You're not going to buy into that story. But when I say to you, look, Matt, my dad had a large plumbing firm. Like he had a large plumbing firm in New Zealand. It was about the third largest plumbing firm in New Zealand, employed about 50 staff, 50 master plumbers. So it was a big firm in the context of that sort of trade. Built it up over 29 years. And it was a great plumber, drain layer, roofer, gas fitter. He had all of the tickets. But he hadn't been to university. He wasn't an accountant. I remember the day I got first class honours in accounting. I rang my dad because I couldn't get hold of mum and said, Dad, I got first class honours. Dad says, what's that? I said, it was pretty good, Dad. He says, does it mean I have to come to one of those pompous ceremonies again? I said, yes, it does. He said, do I have to wear a tie? I said, yes, you do. He says, will you buy me a beer afterwards? I said, yes, I will. He said, okay, I'll come then. But the point is, he's not an academic. He's a plumber who'd built a business. So when I started understanding the stuff about governance, I wanted to be able to communicate it to people like my dad in a way he could understand. And funnily enough, we started this conversation by talking about where I got into this. And part of why I got into it was I wanted to get my dad to understand the value of a board for his business. What happened, of course, you can't sit your father down and say, hey, but, you need to learn from me as a 21-year-old upstart about boards of directors. So I figured that if I started talking to other people around the world about them, eventually by some form of osmosis, he would learn. That was the plan. So I started doing the stuff, and we started the Sadar Group and wrote the books and whatever. And eventually I went jet skiing on the Wanganui River with him in my hometown in New Zealand. And we were taking the jet ski off the back of off the river and putting it on the back of the truck. And my dad said, that thing you run, which he was referring to one of the workshops we ran at the time. He said, that thing you run? The next time you run one of those here in Wellington or down in Wellington, I'll come. So I was like, brilliant. Finally done. I've got this, After 4 or 5 years of working in it, I've convinced my dad he's going to come to one of these workshops. Hopped on a plane, flew over here to South Africa for a couple of weeks' work. And the weekend I landed here, I got a phone call from my mum. And my mum said, your dad's had a stroke. On the Richter scale, it was about a 9.5. So basically that means today he still can't talk properly, still can't walk properly. And within 3 weeks of him having that stroke, I had to do one of the single hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, which was sign the form that put my dad's business into voluntary liquidation, because he was basically in a coma and was going to be in one for some time, and his business was, it was the middle of the global financial crisis, and that had an impact on building and blah, blah, blah. You get the story. The point is that never needed to happen. If my father had understood, not that he was just a plumber, but that he was doing this thing called running a business, and that being a plumber doesn't mean you know how to run a plumbing firm. Being a baker doesn't mean you know how to run a baking firm or a bakery. Being an accountant doesn't mean you know how to run an accounting firm. Being a lawyer doesn't mean you know anything. And being a politician does not mean you know how to run a country. But, the last two are probably opinions rather than facts. The point is, what fundamentally flawed logic? Because you're an expert in your craft, you are ordained to run the business delivering your craft. It's absurd. Yet, on a daily basis, we encourage entrepreneurs to do exactly that. And we wonder why we have failure rates that we do. We wonder why we have, in particular industries like veterinary and dentistry, we have suicide rates at the highest of all industries, because we force people in the craft to run the businesses in their craft. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. One of the things great story, by the way, you should have started with that. Would have been a real great hook in the beginning.
Hey,
we'll have to restructure
there's a thing
show.
called cut and paste, eh?
Yeah, exactly. QDog just timestamp that and then move that forward. And then, but you mentioned the word emotional intelligence. It came up yesterday on a podcast I did with Gert Leonhard. The man, the legend. He's just a rock star in this exponential technology space.
Yep.
Anyway, so this emotional intelligence thing, I'm going to pick up on that because it's kind of the outcome of the story in some respects.
Yep.
In the sense that if you don't have it, in other words, if you're a 3 and you need it to be at an 8, you're not going to see what you need to see. Like your dad, it took time for him to see what he needed to see.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the timing was such that ultimately it cost the highest price imaginable, which is your business, and that being your family and in the day, and the people in it. So the role of the board there, is that something that I could use as a vehicle to hire? Or remember, I was talking about the MD, right? Whatever the title is, the throat to choke.
Yep.
Because I'm so I don't feel like I could be completely 100% objective, and because of that, is that where you feel the role of the board could bring that emotional intelligence to the table and say, Matt, here's who we feel is the right person for that function?
So in a business like yours, ultimately, if you don't like the person, they're not going to succeed. So there's going to be a strong element of Matt in that journey. But the board is definitely who the managing director or chief executive or whatever the title is reports to. And therefore, they've got to play a role in the recruitment and appointment of that. One of the core functions of a board is to hire, fire, and performance manage the chief executive. That's their core job. So absolutely in your particular journey, where you're looking to step back and have a business that's not reliant on you, the board would play a big role in that. And we would look for someone, in your case, as a result of that, who's had that experience.
Okay. I want to talk to you very briefly about the process. I want to wrap that up because I know we got it. Step 2 is about deciding who should be on there. What's the third step in terms of the running and the mandate around, reporting, frequency, decision-making, chairman, role of operations, blah, blah, blah. Walk us through that.
So phase 2 is the selection, and there's a process we run around that, including understanding a thing called natural energy, which is really interesting in terms of the correlation between natural energy and the performance of a business. So that's sort of part of the journey. And then from there, once we've selected the people, we go to phase 3, which is what we call guiding great boards, which is all about the journey of implementing and then continually growing and developing the board of your business. Now, I like to think about it like this. Like, I see you're an intelligent person because you have a Mac. Some people don't.
That's the only reason. How long have we been doing this show? 50 minutes. Haven't impressed him yet.
See, there's a high bar when you've got a board. And the thing about your Mac or the other thing for those of you who have that is when you buy your computer, you don't take it home and open it up and then go, okay, let me write the operating program to run my computer. We open it up and it has an operating system, right? As I say, if you're a Mac person, it has the right one. If you don't, then it doesn't. But the point is, it has a system that works, right? But so many of us, and so many of you listening to this, are going to walk out of this thing, go, a board is a great idea. I'm understanding the value. I really see that. And you're going to do the cardinal sin of creating a board. You're going to pick up your phone and you're going to ring your two mates who have just left their jobs, and you're going to ask them if they will be directors of your company. That's the equivalent of taking home the computer, opening it up, and deciding to write your own operating software. You're not a computer expert. There might be one or two of you who are, but you get my point, right? It's the same with a board. You don't decide you're going to have a board and then go, okay, how regularly should my board meet? What should my board papers include? Who should be on my board? What is a board evaluation? You're not the expert. Get a methodology, choose a methodology, and implement that methodology. Now, if you want the best in the world, the Mac of board methodologies, you would use ours. If you want something else, you'd choose something else. But the point is, choose a methodology and stick to it. We have a particular way for running a board. And I'm not saying that every single part of that process, if you like, all the apps on our methodology are ultimately right for you. But what I am saying is, to start off with, we're going to give you the phone with the apps. And you're going to run your board using that model and that methodology for a period of time so that you get a handle and an understanding of things. And then we're going to start going, okay, well, maybe we delete that thing and we can add a different app, or there's something we need to create specifically for you. But the point is, there's a methodology that underpins all of that is the foundation of the way you run your board, because you're not a board expert. And that's not a question of anything other than it's just not the industry that you play in.
There's a whole bunch of stuff we can get into about hiring and firing board members, the role of a chairman and things like that. And as you say, pick a methodology, and I would say outsource that.
Exactly.
100%. So how do I know whether that board is providing sufficient value or the right kind of value? Or let's just say, in the due diligence phase, we chose Bongani over there, your new business development manager. Great guy, by the way. You should totally phone him.
Awesome guy.
And, let's just say Bongani, for better or worse, the chemistry is not right. Let's just make it something that's quite intangible. It's not a decision that he made that was incorrect or whatever. But he's just, the chemistry is not right. And that for me is a thing. Because as you said, it's about
it's easy, right?
How do you manage that? And
part of having us involved in the process is you ring us up, or we probably have picked it up before you have, but you'll ring us up and you'll go, Carl, I'm not feeling Bongani. And then this happens regularly, right? And we dig into it. And it's either going to be 7 out of 10 times you're not feeling Bongani because you don't like what he's telling you, right? And we work that out fairly quickly. Matt, he keeps telling me X. And why do you think there's a problem with X, Matt? Well, it's making me feel uncomfortable and I don't really want to do it. Well, that doesn't mean it's wrong. So let's just understand, or there might just be, he's the wrong person. A couple of times out of 10, there's just maybe a bit more of a getting to know and we need to dig in a little bit. And then probably 1 out of 10 times, it's just the two of you clash, and it doesn't matter whether he's right, wrong, or otherwise, or you're right, wrong, or otherwise. He's not the right person for your board, and we change him. And that's expected, right? It's easy, and it's not a difficult thing to change a director, particularly if you contract them properly. Again, use a methodology, and you'll cover those things off, and we can fix that reasonably easily. But when it comes to understanding, have you got the right board? There's a couple of what I call the litmus tests. It's not rocket science. First of all, when you look at your board, and maybe this is for those of you who are sitting there going, I've got a board, but it's not working well. If your board told you something that you didn't like, would you listen to them or would you ignore them? Bottom line is, if you already know, you would ignore them. If I said to you, if your board told you to jump and you couldn't understand or what or why, would you jump? If you say no to that question, you have the wrong directors. the wrong combination of directors. Because what you're saying is, I inherently don't trust that my board will make the right decision for my business. And therefore, they're the wrong people. It doesn't need more analysis than that, right? The second one is, if you have a board, do you feel the business is more valuable, more sustainable, and in a better position now than it was 6 months ago because of the contribution your board makes? Again, you might not like what they say. They might give you a hard time. They might whatever. But inherently, is the business in a better position? And if you can't answer that, that is your answer. This is not rocket science.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the interesting, just a thought that it came to me was, when you're in survival mode for so long, and then you come out of the trough of, what do they call it, uncertainty, and then you get to product market fit, and then suddenly you scale, you never quite lose that feeling of uncertainty. You know what I'm saying? And it's a thing. People think, oh no, when I get to $1 million, I'll be certain. But no, dude. No. Your payroll gets bigger. We just spent $300,000 renovating this fucking office.
It's awesome, by the way.
It's very cool.
Could just do with a picture of the All Blacks to be real champion energy, but that
was my last question. But yeah, well, sorry again. No, I'm not sorry. Actually, it was the best day.
I actually was on the plane last night with the Highlanders coming over, hopefully to smash the Bulls at Loftus this weekend. But
yeah, we'll see. We'll see about that. I care less about that, only about the World Cup. That's the only thing that matters, right?
Yep. You realise the Springboks are the only team in history to have won a World Cup without beating the All Blacks.
I know. How do you feel about that? So, getting back to the show, Carl.
Hold on, but
what Bongani wants to say something.
The rugby.
Hang on. What?
Oh,
95. What are you talking about? Thank you, bro.
I'm talking about
straight, bro.
No, I'm talking about.
You want to advise my business? You can't even know about your own history, bro.
And the knockouts. But here's an interesting fact about rugby and why it's relevant to this conversation and the fact I love the All Blacks.
Am I going to like this? Because I might get rid of you off my board.
Yeah, you might not like this. Yeah. But the reality is that the New Zealand Rugby Union is the only rugby union in the world with independent directors, a small board, including a woman. And you wonder why the All Blacks are the most successful team in the world, because they have good governance.
Interesting.
So there we go. Good fact, eh?
Amazing. Where did we find this guy? See, I'm so glad. I'm so glad your book. I'm telling you, Carl. The universe had plans for us, my friend. Eh?
Look, everything happens for a reason. Even if you didn't like the book the first time you were given it.
No, I loved the book. I think it was fantastic. I've got now we've
getting
gone
back to the
completely
point.
off center. Now I've forgotten what I was going to ask you. But anyway, I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's an hour in now. I think I want to kind of end off on a couple things. If someone's listening to us right now and is interested in kind of, going on this journey and seeing whether or not this is for them or not, what should they do? Where should they start?
Best place to start is to go to sidargroup.com, throw a message in our contact page and just say, hey, I'm thinking about this idea of starting a board. Can I have a chat? There's a couple of ebooks we'll share with you that are free resources on our website as well. And happy to have a conversation, a coffee about why this is important. And one of the team will have that discussion with you. And, it's a good place to start.
I remember now what I was saying before you hijacked me with your World Cup false trivia, which was this feeling of uncertainty, Carl.
Yes. Yes, your office.
The office thing, exactly. That's it. Was that the board for me? I think may go a long way to alleviating that,
but it won't remove it.
No. If it does, you're an idiot. Yep. You need to reevaluate because I think you don't care then. You're almost just exiting and you're out. But unfortunately, that's not where my head's at. So I think for me alone, just to have that, because the other thing to say is that I don't have a partner. Like, I built this business completely on my own.
Yep.
And on my own steam and with the support, obviously, of the team. But to have a board there is just, it's the idea of it alone. It's like someone you can phone. Like I've got a mentor, as I mentioned earlier, but to have someone that can truly, especially now, because there's no such thing as an idle conversation. And it was like a random lunch, and then suddenly now the whole context has changed, and your head starts to spin around, well, what are we worth? Actually, that's why I asked you, like, can you bring someone in to actually independently value our business, just so we have a number? Because I don't actually know. But I know what I want out, but to have that team in place that can literally guide you and tell you, listen here, dude, do this, don't do that. That for me, especially in the context of the struggle of being an entrepreneur and how lonely that is, and having to figure that stuff out all on your own. Now, and when you're playing in the big leagues, and I call it the big leagues, but for many people listening to me, like, dude, this is not the big leagues. This is like the peewee leagues, But for me, it doesn't feel that way, and I don't give a fuck what you think.
You do have that sort of peewee energy about you, eh?
You think so?
Yeah, I think that could work for you, eh?
Cool. So let's wrap this up, Carl. Why do you do this work? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
So there are a couple of fundamentals, and it comes back, first of all, the story I shared with you before about my dad. Like there is so much we leave on the table as businesses, and ultimately that's about the impact that we have. I'm what some people call an African Kiwi. I'm 100% a Kiwi and an All Black supporter, as you know. I do have a son who's South African who supports the best team in the world, the All Blacks. But the point is this: Africa is where the next 20 years of global growth is going to be. It doesn't matter what way you want to look at it. In my view, the continent is shifting and needs to shift in terms of, or for a whole lot of reasons, and we can go into that in another conversation. But in order to have impact, in order to create the sort of finance a government needs to have health impact, to be able to educate the population, to be able to create the roads, to be able to create the environment we want to live in, whatever way you want to look at it, wherever you are in the world. Obviously, we're focused on Africa, but wherever you are in the world, it's businesses that create those jobs. It's businesses that pay the tax that makes that happen. It's businesses that employ people who pay the taxes that make that happen. And I believe that the work that we do at a board level is where that starts. The board is both the heart, the soul, the mind of any company by legal definition and in reality. And whether you're Matt and you're the only director of your business, or you're a board of this business, just even thinking about that Matt as the only director, the decisions you make aren't as the founder, aren't as the entrepreneur, aren't as the shareholders. By law, every decision you're making in this business starts with your hat as a director. And so if we can influence people like you to do great shit on this continent, we're going to grow the quality of the economies, the population, the tax that's paid, and ultimately have an impact that is sustainable. And I think it's going to create an Africa in 20 years' time that will be unsurpassed if done properly.
Carl Bates.
Cheers, man.
The legend, bro. Pity about the World Cup, but you're welcome to come back anytime and drown your sorrows.